and action. Welcome back to Show and Tell. I am Billie. I'm coming to you from a rainy day in Manhattan from my 9th floor. I have all kinds of lights on because it's a little bit gloomy out there, but never mind the weather. I'm not interested in being the weather girl today, although I have a pretty good track record. Since this is generally a vintage knitting podcast, I do try and throw in some vintage hats and vintage jewelry from time to time. Not everything that I knit is vintage. So what you see hanging behind me is a shawl called the Rosary Vine. I found it very ironic that my current project also has something to do with a growing plant. I'm knitting something called the Hollyhock shawl, but let me come back to that in a moment. Last time I was with you, I was absolutely in a panic because everything that I had on my needles, all my various projects, were all epic fails, and I was so frustrated. I went ahead and ordered yarn for my next project because if you've been watching this podcast for any length of time, you will certainly know that I don't do stash. But no problem, because most of the online yarn companies ship pretty quickly, and being in New York, things tend to arrive rather fast, except when they're being shipped from the furthest point in the United States, California. That was the case with my Purl Soho yarn. This is linen quill that everyone raves about, and I had never used it, so I was really quite enthusiastic to find one of Purl Soho's free patterns, and this was a suitable substitute for the yarn they were calling for. The yarn they suggested only came in 6 different shades, and they were all kind of, beigey and brown, not my palette. So I substituted with their go-ahead linen quill. I hadn't read the instructions very carefully. I ordered the correct amount of yarn. Let me slip in here the video I took of my opening of the package.
Hooray! Hooray! My yarn, my long-awaited yarn from Purl Soho has finally arrived, and I promised to share with you the unpackaging of it. So there's a strip that I could pull, but I will safely use my mother's old scissors. And remember, I ordered purple smoke color because I wanted it to go with this. So here's going to be the true test. Love it. Thank you, Jennifer, if you're watching. I have been waiting so impatiently. I just can't wait. I can't wait to get started. They will only wind maximum of 2, so I had them wind 2 for me, and these other 2, you can't return them if they're wound, so just in case, I have 2 that I could return, but I'm not going to be returning these because they're so gorgeous. This is linen quill. They put this pretty postcard inside. So this is the famous linen quill that so many people rave about. I have never used it. It's very interesting. There's a lot of floof hanging off of.
I did order the correct amount of yarn, but I hadn't realized that you would need to hold it double, 2 strands at the same time. So fortunately, they had balled up for me 2. That's their limit. I have 2 more skeins behind me waiting. I'm going to have to wind those myself. And of course, being in a small apartment, I don't have a Swift, I don't have a ball winder. So I'm going to have 2 chairs set up because I know my husband is not going to want to participate in that activity. It's going to take a long time because each of these skeins has 439 yards. I don't think that I would want to wind them together. I think it's better to have two separate balls that you're pulling from. I love these because I'm a center pull kind of gal. So this just sits flat next to me, and they pull out, and they pull out independently, but I never pull out so much that I have a tangle. I mean, it's great. It's working just great. So as long as I have the ball band in my hand, 439 yards is 100 grams. It gets 26 to 30 stitches in 4 inches or 10 centimeters on a size 2 to 5 needle. Now, because I'm holding it double, the pattern calls for a size 6. I didn't even bother to gauge swatch because it's their yarn. I knew I was going to be close enough, and there's no size to this, it can be whatever it's going to be. It's made in Peru, and my colorway is 1600 Purple Smoke. The reason I chose this color, I wanted something to coordinate with Carol Feller's Dacite, which I recently completed. So I wanted color, but I didn't want it to be loud. I could have done like an acid green, or red or anything, but I wanted it to be a little bit subtle. And I also wanted it to coordinate with other things that I have in my wardrobe. And I do have some other things that are purple lavender-ish. I have a lot of gray, and I keep promising you an episode on just my gray garments, which I will do soon. Anyway, I was so frantic to get started that as soon as I made that little recording for you when I opened the package, I immediately cast on. And it's working out very quickly because this all happened in the last week. So this is only a few days of knitting, I think 2.5 days. I have a bunch of stuff hanging at the bottom because this tends to curl up when it's blocked, and when the final 6-inch or 7-inch tassel goes on, I know the weight of that will hold this in place. You can see that it will need blocking because it's a little bit on the lumpy side. I know that'll block out, not concerned at all. But for the moment, because I want to sit back and enjoy it every time the right side is facing me, I hooked on a couple of little things to give it some weight and a row counter. So I have all of that just hanging there to hold it down. The pattern is easy to follow so far. There are a lot of baubles. They give a pretty simple recipe for making those baubles. There's a little bit of lace, and it's called hollyhock. I'm sure that's named after the flowering plant, hollyhock. Now, if you're up on your World Heritage sites, then you might have known that in 2019, the Hollyhock House, Frank Lloyd Wright's masterpiece in Los Angeles, was designated a World Heritage Site. I have been there. I'm going to show you a series of pictures of the place because I just absolutely adore Frank Lloyd Wright, and I've been to many of the homes and other buildings that he designed. I've been to Falling Water, I've been to Taliesin West in Scottsdale, Arizona. I've been to a couple of private homes, Usonian homes that are north of New York, just slightly outside of New York City, in Westchester County. I've been to Kentuck, which is near Falling Water, the Guggenheim Museum, of course, because it's in my town. There used to be a car showroom that he designed on Park Avenue. Now it's something else, not for cars, but it's still there because I'm pretty sure the interior is landmarked. Where else have I been? A synagogue in Elkins Park, Pennsylvania. That might be about it, but Hollyhock House is really just very, very lovely. One of his houses is way up in the hills, and you can see through it and out into Los Angeles. So I've included an array of pictures. Most of them are taken by the Hollyhock House, but some of them I'll put credits for the photographers who shot these. So getting back to this, I'm pretty sure that the designer, Catherine Lee Abrams, had that flowering plant in mind when she did this, because as you'll see, it does kind of resemble it. So I'm really enjoying it, but I wanted to say a little bit more about the yarn since it's my first time. I don't even know if I would call it a halo. There's stuff. And you see that there's a fiber where my fingertips are, the fiber goes from here out to there. Oh, now I have a little fiber on my hand. There's all sorts of things. Oh, there, you can see that. There's things that stick out all over the place. And it's almost like straw that's been softened. I don't really know how to describe it. It's not super rustic, but it's also not silky, soft, and smooth like a merino would be. Oh, the blend, I didn't tell you. 50% fine Highland wool, 35% alpaca, and 15% linen. So I don't know which of those causes all these fibrous materials to pop out, but maybe it's all three of them. I don't know. I imagine after this is washed, it's going to soften up even further. The drape, you can see. Don't forget, this is doubled, so I think single it will probably have a lot of drape, but it's I wouldn't want it to be too flimsy. I want it to have body when I throw it over my shoulder. I want it to kind of stay put and show its beauty. So I think for what I'm knitting, the drapiness of it is just right. You know, it's always lovely when you're doing something that has texture, pattern, that the backside, the reverse, is easy. And in this case, every other row is just simple purling. I'm not giving away any trade secrets. It's a free pattern. It can be found easily on the Purl Soho website, and I'll leave a link. I do want to say something more about the yarn in addition to all of this, which is a little bit of a personal anecdote. I think that I had mentioned that when I went online to order the yarn, I didn't automatically get a confirmation email, which is kind of a standard thing. So I was suspicious about it, but I knew that the order was placed because I did see come up on my screen an order number. Once you have that, you know your order went through. But I noticed very quickly as it was disappearing off my screen that tax had been added. And in New York City, we have a law that under $110, there's no tax on clothing. And yarn is under the umbrella of clothing because it's used in the manufacture of clothing, as are buttons and zippers and thread and fabric and so on. So I queried Purl Soho. They were very, very polite. They sent me back a detailed explanation of the vendor they use to collect the tax is telling them that online purchases are not under the purview of the law, or there's some confusion about it. So it's advisable that they collect the tax. So I'm not an activist at all, but when I think that something is wrong, I do want to kind of look into it. So I contacted my state's tax department, who referred me to my local assemblyman, Harvey Epstein. And much to my surprise, within a day or so, I heard back from him saying, absolutely, you do not have to pay tax on this. And I will pursue it further to find out why that would be happening. And the next thing I knew, I got a message from someone in his office who was going to look into it further. Well, this all happened in the last week, mind you. Every year, my neighborhood, they have a business district. It's called Union Square BID, Business Improvement District, where there's a quasi-government body that tries to bring businesses into the neighborhood and looks after the development of the neighborhood, the beautification of the park, the safety of the streets around the park, so on and so forth. So every year they have an annual meeting for the public to attend, and local officials and local business owners. So I try and go to those meetings just to keep my finger on the pulse. I've lived in this neighborhood for 47 years, so I am kind of interested in what's going on. At the beginning of the meeting, they had an agenda in the packet that they gave us, and they mentioned who all the speakers of the evening were going to be. And they said, and your local assemblyman, Harvey Epstein, is here this evening. So I was really surprised and very excited. He made a few remarks, dashed off the stage, and was exiting the auditorium. And I got up quickly out of my seat, went to the back of the auditorium, and intercepted him to say very quickly, it looks like you're in a hurry to leave. He said, yeah, I have another meeting I have to get to. And I said, well, let me just walk out with you. I won't take a minute of your time. I had a name tag on, and I had show and tell written there. So I pulled out my card, I gave it to him, and I said, do you recognize my name? We were just in contact a couple of days ago. I'm the yarn lady with the tax situation. He was like, oh, he was so surprised that I was there in person. And he said to me, which was even more exciting, we're going to work on a bill. They're going to try and get a bill passed to make sure that there's no tax charge for online yarn orders. So I will keep you posted as I hear more. I've been in constant communication with the lovely people at Purl Soho. Jennifer, if you're watching, I can't thank you enough. What I haven't said is that that glitch in Purl Soho's software that happened just as I was placing my order, it seems, enabled this yarn to come to me at no cost. So how happy am I with Purl Soho? I mean, I'm getting free yarn is always exciting. So thank you so much, Purl Soho. I look forward to working with you as we move forward with this tax situation, because I have a feeling that there a lot of people in a lot of other states. It would be great if people would comment below if you're in a state or a municipality where that is the case, where there's no tax on clothing, and maybe you could check your local law to see, as I did, that yarn falls under that umbrella. It may be different in other states, I don't know, but it's certainly an interesting thing to consider. So take a look. It wasn't hard to find that law. I went to my state's tax department, and I think I put in something like tax-free clothing or non-taxable clothing purchases. Not a Google search, but a search within the state tax department's website. There's always a search bar on most websites. So, and it brought me right to the tax law. So, and it was short, and I read it, and there said yarn, which I sort of already knew because there have been a couple other times when people have charged me tax and I've said, no, wait, New York City, there's no tax. And a couple of times people took the tax off my order. So what was it that Cy Sims used to say? An educated consumer is our best customer. So that's me, educated consumer. Okay, what's off my needles? You're wondering? This is off my needles. See, I just ripped the needle right out of here in sheer disgust. I cast on 16 times till I finally got a lace pattern that wasn't worming too much. You can see these little loops popping up, right? It's not smooth. So in disgust, I ripped this off my needles. And then I thought, well, before I completely give up hope, let me try a completely different pattern, a different sweater that has a collar. I wouldn't have enough yarn to make the whole sweater in this chenille, but I felt like I would have enough yarn to make the collar and maybe do cuffs or something. So again, I cast on, and this too had to be cast on numerous times because I wasn't getting the same gauge as the pattern, and the pattern called for the collar to be almost 16 inches wide. And I thought that's going to be too wide for my shoulders. It's going to be hanging off somewhere. So I kept tweaking it until I got a width that I kind of liked. This pattern was not just straight stockinette. Every fourth row had an interesting slip stitch motif going. So it wasn't looping too much. Let me see if I hold it horizontally. You see, whoops, that's not it. That was the end of my yarn. Here's a couple of little worms sticking up. The wrong side was looking pretty good if you like that look. It's reverse stockinette, more or less. As I said, this wasn't a row of knit, a row of purl, row of knit, a row of purl, which would make it stockinette. The row that had the slip stitches was opposite everything else. Anyway, so the back is not completely reverse stockinette. It's interesting, but I just wasn't feeling it. I wasn't feeling that I would want to knit a whole sweater in a different yarn than this and then slap this thing on that just isn't, it's not up to my standards. I mean, I don't know any other way to say it. Well, ironically, I was watching Irina's interview with Kate Fassett. And in that interview, he was talking about the various yarns that he has used over his decades and decades of designing. And he gave a really lovely story about being at an event where he approached someone, a vendor, and saw his beautiful white chenille yarn. And the man said, oh, for you, we can dye it in any color that you want. And I believe that he tried to work with this lovely yarn. In this little story, he said, and I quote, I stopped using chenille because it's difficult to knit with. Hello? Why didn't you send me that memo, Kaif? I never would have bought this. I never would have wasted 2 weeks trying to come up with something, and I still don't have anything. Now, I implored you, my fine audience, to send me suggestions. A few of you did. Michelle Marks suggested maybe Miss Marple kind of a scarf matching hat. A couple other people sent me ideas. Petra Manos said maybe something with a slip stitch, use different yarn, and then just enter this on, maybe every 4th or 10th row, just so you have a little bit of it peeking out. And she sent me a photograph of something that she had done with not a chenille, but another beautiful yarn. So, I got a couple of ideas, but I'm not seeing a specific pattern yet that I can use this with. I do not want to throw this yarn away. It didn't cost a lot, but I do love the color so much. And I love the hand. So maybe someday I'll come back to this. If anyone should ever tell you that yarn speaks to them, don't think that they're crazy. This chenille was speaking to me. I just didn't have the right headset in. It was telling me, like, no, this is not going to work for you. And I should have realized after the fifth or the sixth or the eighth cast on, but no, I was hell-bent to get this thing going, and I just kept persisting because usually persistence pays off, right? Not in this case. So that is in a semi-permanent timeout. We'll see where we're going with that. Hang on a minute. I want to go dig through my closet and find this scarf that I have that's made of chenille. I haven't seen it in a long time. Give me a second. I'm not sure how well you can see this. It's not knit, it's woven by someone named Mary Lynn O'Shea. I don't know if she's still around. I've had this for probably about 35 years. Very rarely wear it because it has this. So it's a little bit fancy. It was purchased for me by my late stepmother. A woman of exquisite taste, the loveliest woman. So happy to have had her in my life for 54 years. It's one of many, many beautiful things that she bought me. But it is, as you can see from these, it's woven with ribbon and yarn. So, a variety of different textures. There's absolutely no worming out here, I can tell you that. Well, now that I unearthed it, I probably should wear it. I wish you could see the rain. I think I might have to turn my camera around for you to see what's going on outside my window. Can you see that? It's just teeming. Earlier this month, there was an article in the New York Times entitled, "Are You Ever Too Old to Wear Vintage?" It wasn't I who was asking that question. There's a column called Ask Vanessa, and someone named Eileen from Larchmont, New York, wrote in, "I have always enjoyed wearing vintage clothing and used to love going to flea markets, picking up items and saying, my grandmother wore that, or my mother had those. Then it happened. I picked up a dress and said, I owned that. When you get old enough to remember the first time around, can you still wear retro without looking dated?" And I don't want to spoil it for you. I read the article. I already know the answer, but I will leave a link in my show notes where you too can go and read that article. If you're a vintage lover like I am, I think you'll find it interesting. Rhinebeck is less than a month away. Raise your hand if you're going. I would love to hear from you in the comments, and I'll just tell you, for right now, I know that I'm traveling with 5 other people in a luxury sedan car. We've all chipped in. Someone who used to work at Purl Soho, in fact, organized this, and because my experience getting there last year by train, the train wasn't the issue. It was getting from the train station to the fairgrounds that had me in a bit of a panic, especially coming back. I couldn't get a taxi. I couldn't get an Uber. I tried to reserve in advance. And just a day or two before the event, they called me to cancel. They said, this is our busiest weekend of the year, lady, and you'll just have to wait on the queue. We'll have a shuttle going back and forth. Well, that's fine if you could find them on the way back. And I called them and they were like, oh yeah, we're coming, but no one ever came. So I had to start approaching strangers in the parking lot to say, please, please, could you take me and my husband to the Amtrak station? Luckily, we got there in time for our return train, but the stress for me just simply wasn't worth it. So I'm going to try this new approach. I will be on Podcaster Hill probably around 12 or 12:30 on Saturday. So if you're going, do look for me there. I would love to meet you. Last year, I met only one person. I heard somebody yelling out, Billie, Billie. And it was Estella. So I hope to see her again, but there may be others. So let me know in the comments if you're going and if maybe we can try and meet up. That would be really fun. So that about does it for this week. If you liked this episode, you can find many, many others. In this corner, there's going to be a link directing you to a place where you can find a slew of other show and tell videos from the past 3 years. Don't forget to subscribe so you'll know about upcoming episodes. Don't forget to hit the thumbs up, the like button, and thanks for engaging with the podcast. I wish I could meet each one of you in person. Maybe someday that would be possible. Until then, signing off. Take care, everybody. Enjoy the next week.